Thanks, Joel. Good morning, everyone. Arun Santosh. I'm a worldwide solution architect with AWS, and I specialize in QuickSight. My background has been in BI and data throughout, when before coming on board AWS to work on QuickSight. So in today's session, we will be covering the basic authoring. So I'll start with setting up a QuickSight account, a fresh QuickSight account. We will go through basic authoring, more detailed, in-depth authoring, advanced calculations. That's the full agenda for our 3-hour session today. We will be taking a break around 10:45 PST, 12:45 Central, for a 15-minute break, and then we will reconvene for the last hour. Probably it will be the last hour where we cover table calculations and advanced calculations, but it will give you the continuity to pay attention to the full session. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen. We'll get started in a moment. Okay, so I have shared my screen here. What I have up is the AWS console, and this is on a fresh AWS account, which has spun up just for this webinar. And in here, I will first take you through setting up a QuickSight account. Many of you might be already having your personal account or might have an account in your enterprise QuickSight, user in your enterprise QuickSight account. So just follow along in case you haven't seen the experience of setting up a QuickSight account from scratch. So what we do is from the AWS console, we can just search for QuickSight service, and that will launch onto the screen, which gives me the option to sign up for QuickSight. So I'll click sign up for QuickSight button in there. It gives me two options to choose from, the standard or enterprise. We want you to be using the enterprise version. That's the fully packed version, and it's a lot of the things that we will be talking about in this webinar requires enterprise edition. So go ahead and click continue there. And in this configuration screen, we will leave the edition for role-based federation, region selection, US East 1, it's North Virginia. For the account name, we want this to be unique. So I'm just going to put in QSWS for QuickSight Workshop and my email handle followed by a date to make it unique. In your case, if you're setting up a fresh one, be sure to put in a unique value that makes sense to you. This stays on for the whole life of your QuickSight account. So choose something that you're happy with. And then for email address, I'm putting in my official email there. All the other setting, we can leave at default and click finish at the bottom of the screen. So now it's setting up my QuickSight account. It should be up in like 30 seconds. And it says I am successfully signed up. So I can click this option to go to QuickSight. And it's setting up a few samples for me to start with. Sorry. And first of all, I'll give a quick walkthrough of our portal. This has been recently redesigned. We added folders, and along with it came a new look and feel. So I will quickly run through the portal. The top panel here, the QuickSight icon, you can see it's a link, and any time you click on that, it will bring you back to this starting page that you're at. and you will find this icon in almost all the pages that we have, be it analysis, dashboards, data prep. So that's one quick shortcut to keep in mind. The search panel would let you search for all objects. So if I were to just search for sales, it's showing me matches on my sales pipeline sample data set as well as my sales pipeline sample analysis. Can cancel out of the search from here. The person icon to the right, if I click on that, it gives me a variety of options. I can get into my admin panel by selecting Manage QuickSight. You would see this only if you are having admin access to your account. So if you're on an enterprise account and your admin has set you up with an author account or author user there, you wouldn't see this Manage QuickSight option. And that's fine. You don't need that for regular authoring or for today's workshop. Community, this is how you get into the QuickSight community that Jill mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, where you could post your questions and specific to this workshop, as well as other generic QuickSight queries you might have. The language selection and region selection is available here, and so are the tutorial videos. So there is a whole bunch of small tutorial videos available here. I highly recommend that you go through these at a later point. They are really helpful to get you a head start if you're just starting up on QuickSight. So with that, let me click back on this QuickSight icon top left. So like I mentioned earlier, it dropped me back into my starting page. Okay, so now let's go through this content here. So right now I am in my analysis view, and I'm having my tiled view for my samples. I have an option to see it as a list view as well by toggling this tile or list icon from the top panel. And let's say I want to tag something as favorite. I can click the star icon here against the analysis that I want to tag as my favorites, and then it would show up in my favorites panel. If I click on this favorites from left panel, the ones that I bookmarked, those show up here. And same way I can deselect that and remove them from my favorites as well. Any of the content that you use recently should show up under your recent items. And then we have your the My folders. This is to organize your own content. So if you have a lot of analysis, a lot of data sets and dashboards, and you want to organize it in a way that makes sense to you, this would be the place to do it. You can create new folders from here and put your content underneath that. And then shared folders would let you organize content that you want to share with other users. So earlier you used to be able to share your data sets, analysis, dashboards. Now you can put all of that into a folder and share it at the folder level as well. So we will create one shared folder here as well. Let's just call it test folder and create it. So now when I go in here, I do have a share option. And if you have other users created on this QuickSight account, you will be able to share it with them. Right now, I haven't created any other users, so we'll circle back to this at a later stage. Then if there are published dashboards, they show up under this dashboards section. And right now, we don't have anything published. It's showing up empty. We will be publishing dashboards as we go along. And of course, analysis, we have our sample analysis, and same with data sets. We have our samples available there. So that was a very quick walkthrough of the portal and the new layout we have. Now we can get started with actually pulling in some data and preparing the data and get into the authoring session. So for that, Along with the workshop, Jill had, along with the workshop invite, Jill had shared a link to this workshop where you could download the data for this. And I will just drop this URL in the chat as well in case any of you haven't downloaded this already. So I've dropped that into Chime chat, the URL. You can go in there and download the file for the workshop. I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay, so now proceeding, I'm back on my QuickSight page. I'm in my datasets section here. And on the top right, I have this button for new dataset. So let's go ahead and click that. Here it gives the full listing of the connectors we have available right now. So as you can see, we have the option to upload a file, pull data from S3, Athena, wide variety of databases, and then any of the existing data sources that's created would show up at the bottom as well. So the samples that were set up along with the product, those are based on S3. That's why it's showing up at the bottom. So right now, let's click this upload a file option from top left and select the file that you downloaded. So that's the patientinfo.csv and click open. So it will upload the file, and once that upload completes, it opens up this confirm dialog for me. I'll wait a moment here just to make sure everybody is following along. And for the audience, if you're having two screens, it would be very helpful if you can have my Chime window on one screen while you follow along on the other. Split screens if you can. If not, I will try to be as descriptive as possible. So I'll be calling out where I'm clicking a button from. Is it from the top panel, left panel, so on and so forth. But when in doubt, always flip back to the screen that's being shared here and try to follow along there. So from this confirm file upload setting, click the edit setting and prepare data button. And that gets us to the data prep window here. So the first thing we can do, notice that up top in the top panel, there is the small box which has the name of the data set. By default, it has taken the name of the file that was uploaded. This is an editable field, so I can change this to take out the hyphen if I want to, and I can call this patient info data set, just typing that in there. And then you will see that there are two save options. There is a save and visualize, and there is a save. So let's just save it once so that it drops us back into the portal, and I want to show you how to locate this data set and get back into it in this data prep mode. So I'm clicking the save button from the top panel. So you can see it took me back to my dataset screen, and the patient info dataset shows up as the most recently created one there. So I'm clicking on patient info dataset. It gives me a pop-up, and therein there is this button, edit dataset. So if I click edit dataset, it takes me back to the data prep screen. And in here, we can do several things like let's look at this first field name. It's called patient ID. So that's how it came in from the CSV file. If we want to rename this to spell it out completely as patient identifier, clicking that pencil icon against that header in the preview opens up the rename column header dialog, and we can edit in the value we want for the name and hit apply. You can see that the heading changed and the field name in the left panel also changed to patient identifier. Likewise, this is a numeric field, so QuickSight identified it as an integer, but I'm not going to use this as a measure. This is a dimension field. So the best practice with that is to change that to a string. So to change this data type, I can click the int in the second row of preview, and it gives me an option with other data types available. And from there, I can choose string. So that changes the data type. Now, we could do other things like adding calculated fields. So if you see the left panel, there is a button with the option to add calculated field. So go ahead and click that. That will open up a calculation editor screen for you. We need to create one calculation. We will be using this in the analysis build later on. So I'm going to call it hospital group. And the calculation I'm going to put in is an if-else calculation. So you can just start typing in if-else in the bottom calculation panel, calculation editor there, and you should get a type ahead. And within that, start typing in hospital. Again, you will get type ahead. That gets you the field name. So I'm going to check if hospital equal to North Hospital. So I'm just typing in that value there in single quotes. Then I want to put this under group A. So again, group A, I am typing in single quotes after a comma. And the if-else command that we have here works pretty much like an SQL code. So I can check multiple conditions in the same if-else without having to nest one if-else within the other. So after group A, I'm going to put a comma and I'm going to check the next condition, and that I'm checking again for hospital name. I'm going to check if that matches South Hospital. Then I also want to put it under group A. And I could very well do this in the first condition itself as an or hospital equal to North Hospital or hospital equal to South Hospital. I'm doing this across two rows just to show the capability of if-else to check multiple conditions. And then I can close it off with a default value. So if the hospital doesn't match either of these values, I want to call it as group B. So let me copy this calculation. I'll drop that into chat as well if any of you are having trouble with calculation. And then I'll save this. So you can, after I hit the save button there, it lands me back into the data prep screen. And here now in the left panel, it shows me hospital group under calculated field. And we can check and see if that's working or not. So if you see the preview, there is the hospital field there. It has values like North Hospital, South Hospital. And if you scroll down a little bit, few rows, you will see a downtown hospital in there as well. So scroll to the rightmost, and then you will see the hospital group column there. And it's all having group A's, but if you scroll down a bit, you will see group B coming in for the downtown hospital record there. So our calculation is holding good. So now for the next part of this, I want to show you the Sagemaker integration part, but we won't be using that for this workshop. So you can actually just watch my screen. You don't need to follow along here. Just watch my screen. Okay, let me just save this so I don't lose that one. I am flipping over to a different account here. And within this, I'm going to change my, in fact, before I change my region, let me show you one more thing. So I'm going into my Manage QuickSight option to get to the admin panel. And in here, I have the security and permissions option. This is what controls which all other services we are allowing QuickSight to access. So if I go in there, I have the option to enable access to SageMaker. So by default, it won't be enabled. If you want to integrate a SageMaker model, you have to do this as a first step to come in here and enable it. And once you do that, then I switch over to Ohio, where I have one sample I can use to show you. Okay. In here, customer June and edit data set. So, like I mentioned earlier, you're just following along here just to see what's possible with SageMaker augmentation there. So I have already mapped in a SageMaker model, so I can go manage it. So this is the kind of screen I get. This is the same screen I would get if I'm going to add a SageMaker model for the first time. So from there, I could make a selection of the model that I have within my QuickSight, within my AWS SageMaker account, and then there is a schema file which needs to be uploaded, which has information as to what all are the input fields that needs to be passed into the SageMaker model and what's the expected output. And that's in JSON format. It would look something like, let me just open up. I will just open up our samples to show you that. One moment. So it is in this kind of a format wherein you say what's the input file format, what all fields are being passed in, what is the output. That's the kind of details that needs to be included in the JSON, and then it gets the field mapping here. And then we have the opportunity to go to the next page and map it to our data set. So these are the fields which we are feeding to SageMaker, which field from our data set we want to map to each of those. We can do that. And then likewise for the output, this is the output that we are going to get from SageMaker model. What do we want to call it in the augmented data set? And then if we click prepare data, it goes in and runs the model with the data that we have, gets the output from SageMaker model. In this case, it's whether a customer churns or not, true or false value, and that becomes part of the data set. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind if you are working with SageMaker models. This helps you easily pull in the data into visualization layer without having to build a data pipeline. And each time you refresh this data set, it will run that SageMaker model again and with the new data and pull back the output. Also, another feature I want to show in this account, this is a preview enabled account. The SageMaker one is generally available. That's available for you to use right now. But the feature I'm going to show you next is just in preview. So the left panel, it's been made adjustable. This is something which will be rolled out across all QuickSight accounts over the coming months. This really helps if you have a long field name, and earlier you had to hover over a field name to get parts that were hidden. Now with this feature, you will be able to get a really wide panel to make sure you are able to see the full field name there. Okay, so with that, I'm going back to my demo account here and getting back into my data prep screen. You're still following along just visually. You don't need to do this bit. I want to show you one more thing before we go further into the steps that I want you to follow along. Okay, so just watch this bit. I can add more data to this particular CSV if I want to bring in another CSV and join it with this data. I can click this add data option up top and use the upload a file button. And in my case, I'm just going to bring in some hospital notes. It's just a file with 3 records that I'm bringing in. It has the hospital name. It has some text on what that hospital is specialized in. So I can go into the next button there. Now it brought it in as a table into this data prep screen. And you can see these 2 red dots there. If I click on that, it lets me configure a join. So herein, I can select the hospital name on both of those and specify what kind of join I want it to be, left, inner, left, right, or full outer join, and hit apply. So it will do the join, and then it will pull the hospital notes field into my data prep. So you can see here, now it has brought in the hospital notes. Okay. Likewise, if I wanted to do a star schema, I could add more. So I could switch data source. I could pull something from my S3, bring that in, and it would by default come on top of this anchor table. I could define a join with that. Or if I wanted to snowflake it from, say, this hospital notes table, I can just drag it by this handle and bring it on top of the hospital notes, wait for that to turn green and drop it, and then it can snowflake out from there, and I configure the join here. So I just wanted to show you this capability. For now, we are not going to use either of this, so I'll go ahead and remove this. Both of these. So this is back to the original state that you had it in. Now this part, the next part, you can follow along as well. So look at this admit date here, the second column. It has dates from 2016, 2018, 2017, right? So in this left panel, we have this option to filter data as well. So if go ahead and click add filter from the left panel, bottommost tile, click add filter and select admit date. And then it adds a filter. If you click on that admit date filter, it opens up the filter configuration section there. By default, it says between. Change that drop down to say after, and then click in the date field there. And from date picker, let's go back to January, and then from the date selection, I mean, where it says 2020, you have the option to roll back the years. So I'm rolling it back to 2018. So it gives me the calendar for that. And then I'm going to click 1st Jan in there. So it sets that date. Now, if you click anywhere outside of that, you can come back to the filter panel and hit apply. So now when the data preview reloads, you can see that earlier there, whatever 2016 and 2017 dates that were there, they are all gone. Now it's showing me only 2018 dates, right? So this, I wanted to point this out because this is useful if you're going against a data source like a Redshift cluster or your Postgres database, which has say 10 years worth of data, and you're trying to just pull in 2 years of data into QuickSight's in-memory storage, what we call as SPICE, and then do further analysis on it, then you can apply such a filter right from the data prep so that it pulls back only the amount of data that you want it to. So yeah, right now, for our purposes, we want the full data that was available in the CSV. So you can go ahead and click delete filter from the left panel. So that removes the filter, and you will start seeing the 2016 and 17 dates here in preview again. So let's get into the next stage of building an analysis now. So for that part, let's use the save and visualize button. Earlier we had used save. Now let's click on save and visualize from the top panel. So when I click save and visualize, it directly took me to an analysis build interface. And same way as we had seen with the data prep screen earlier, there is this name edit option up top. By default, it took the name of my data set and slapped on the term analysis at the end of it. So I can edit this right from here. I'm just going to remove the data set part, and I'm just going to call it patient info analysis. And this is an autosave mode. So you can see here to the right of the box that autosave is on. So any changes I make within the analysis layer, it will be automatically saved. Now, let's click the QuickSight icon from top left. If I click that, it takes me back to my original landing page, which since I am an author, it took me to the analysis listing. And you can see that the patient info analysis has been created here. So if I want to get back to it at any point, I can come to this view, just click on the patient info analysis, and that opens up the same view that we were in. Okay, so now we can start building some visuals. So for that, in fact, before I get into that, let me quickly give you a rundown of this interface. Again, we have this top panel with some features, adding components, redo, undo, print, share, and such. And then in the left panel, we have a context sensitive menu here. So right now it's opened up to visualize. And when it's in visualize mode, we get our field list and visual types within this left panel. So whenever I say field list and visual types, you know where you should be going. Likewise, in this top part of the visual build panel here, there is this section called field wells. So that's also important. I would be referring to this field wells now and then as we go along this build. So now from the field list, I'm going to directly click on where it says field list. So that's a search bar as well. It doubles as a search bar. And I'm going to type in revenue. So when I typed in REVE itself, it gives me revenue. So if I just single click on revenue, that gets added to my visual. And you can see that it brought it in as a sum of revenue. So the title of the visual changed to sum of revenue. It's showing me an overall sum of revenue from across my data set. And why it's doing it this way is because by default, if you see under visual types, it's selected to that lightning bolt icon, which is our autograph mode. So we are essentially telling QuickSight that you decide what's the best way to represent this data and plot it accordingly. So right now, since we selected only one measure field, it's showing me as a KPI value. And in here, it's come with 4 decimal places. When I'm looking at such a big value, I don't necessarily care about 4 decimals. So how can I just see the integer part of this? So for that, let's change the format of revenue. So from left panel, just hover to the right, hover your mouse to a little to the right of where it says revenue, to the right of the green box, and you should see a menu option there. So if you click on that, then you will get a pop-up wherein you can select the format. So select the option which says just 1,235 without any decimals. And that will immediately change the format displayed within the KPI visual here. Okay, so now let's close this search. We had searched for revenue in field list. So there is an X mark against whatever we typed, and it says clear field list filter. So click on that X mark. So you see the full field list again. The first field in there is admit date. So let's go ahead and click that and see what happens. So when we did that, the visual changed. Now it's showing a line chart now, right? This is because, as we talked about earlier, the visual type is still in our autograph mode. So when we introduced a time dimension, QuickSight understood that this is a time dimension, and the best way to show it would be as a line chart. So that's what it has done. And also notice the title of that visual. It automatically changed to sum of revenue by admit date. Okay. And I will also call your attention to the scroll bar here. It's a 3-part scroll bar. Right now, it's zoomed out completely, and it's showing you full 3 years worth of data. If you click on the handle to the left and then move that to the right, now you are zooming in, right? And you will see that it's focused more on 2018 timeframe. And then when you get to a particular zoom level and you want to span across the time range at that zoom level, then you can click the center handle and then move it. So now you're scrolling across your line chart at that zoom level. So let me just reset this. And also want to call your attention to the field wells now. So I had told you about this top panel called field wells. Earlier it was empty. Now you can see that against x-axis, it's showing admit date, and against the value, it's showing revenue. And if you click on that field well anywhere, that panel anywhere, it opens up. And you can see the actual field wells in there for x-axis value and color. And let's click the drop down against admit date. So therein it gives you an option for aggregate. By default, it's showing day. Let's try changing that to year and see how the visual is changing. And I'm going to change it to quarter. So to get a quarterly view, or final state I want is, let's keep it at week level. Okay. So we are plotting still the full 3 years, but we are plotting 1 point on the chart for each week. Now at this state, let's also add a forecast to this. So we have time series data. If we want to use the inbuilt forecasting capabilities of QuickSight to add on some forecast as to how this data is going to look like over the next several weeks, we can easily do that by clicking the floating menu to the top right of this visual, where it gives you the 3 dots, menu options. Click on that and then select add forecast from that. So it opens up a forecast properties panel on the left. And you can see that by default, it's adding 14 periods of forward forecast. And you can see on the visual, there is this orange line that has come. It's plotting the forward forecast for the next 14 weeks based on the data that we have here already. And say if you want to look at backward forecast, if you want to see if your forecast is closely gelling with your data, you could type in a value into the backward forecast. So I'm going to just put in 7 there and hit the apply button at the bottom. So what it is now doing is plotting the forecast backwards on top of our actual data. So that will let us know how closely the forecast was matching with our true data. Now in here, it might not track very closely because this is completely made up data. But in any business scenario where you have true data that's coming in for a good period of time, you should see a close match. And this is using an algorithm called random cut forest algorithm in the backend to generate this forecast. And that's what drives Amazon's business decisions as well. So it's pretty time-tested algorithm that we are using there. There is a prediction confidence interval you could set. So that's this lighter orange section you're seeing here right now. It's set to 90% confidence, so that band is wider. If you say you want to look at a 50% confidence interval, then you will get a much tighter band, as you can see. But the prediction confidence is that it will fall within that range. That's the 50% confidence we are saying. So let's change it back to 90. Hit apply. Okay, I'll pause there a moment to make sure everybody is caught up. Okay, so moving on, let's now close this forecast properties panel from left. So there is an X mark up top. Let's just close it. And let's click on insights from the left panel. Earlier we were on visualize, and we have filter and insights. Let's select insights there. Okay. So a new panel opens up and it's giving you some callouts. This is because QuickSight has been looking at the data as we plotted this one chart, and it's calling out some of the things that it thinks might be of interest to us. Like what's the highest week in terms of revenue over this entire date range, right? So, and when I select that, it also shows me on the chart where that point is. Now, if I want to add this as a natural language narrative to my dashboard, I can do that easily by just clicking this plus icon within that box, and it gives me, it says add insight. So I'm going to click that plus icon within highest week, and it adds a visual to my analysis here. I'll click on insights again, and I will also add the lowest week. So I'm clicking the plus against lowest week. So it added both max and min values into my analysis. Now the minimum value, I'm going to leave here on the left-hand side. The maximum value got pushed to the bottom. So I'm going to grab that visual by its center handle. There's this handle on top center. And I'm going to move that to top right of my screen. And I will resize both of these to make it smaller. And I can do that using this control at the handle at the bottom right of each visual. So if I click on that and drag it, I can resize this visual. So I'm going to make it smaller. I'll do that for both of my insights that I added here. Okay, so now let's click on this minimum insight, and let's click on the visual menu, the three dots, and select the customize narrative option. So that opens up a full screen narrative editor for me. So I can change the text in here. I could add whatever other natural language explanation I want to do. I can format the colors and such. So in here, let's say if I wanted to change this lowest to minimum revenue, I could just highlight that and just type over as minimum revenue. Okay. And you can see that it changes in the preview section down here. Likewise, if I wanted to highlight this section where it says the formatted value, and I want to show this in red, I can just select that and then go into this top panel, select the font color and select red. And that changes in the preview also. And with those two changes, I'm going to click save from top right of this editor. And you can see that that change is made in this visual. Likewise, for the maximum, I'm going to go in there, customize the narrative. I'm just going to make this show up in green, the measure show up in green, and then save. So having this title as min and max doesn't really make sense for me. I can get rid of that since I'm already calling it out as part of my natural language text here. So for that, I'm going to click the first visual, the minimum visual, and then click this gear icon on the visual menu. So when I do that, it opens up my format visual panel to the left. And from there, I'm going to deselect the show title. So that takes away the title. Now, I can just select the maximum visual now. I'm not closing out the format visual, that stays. But when I make the selection onto my next visual, now it knows that this needs to act with the new visual that's selected. So you can see that it's showing me the show title box is checked. I'm going to deselect that. So now both of my insights don't have any title. Okay. And at this point, let's add an overall title to the dashboard, right? So we didn't do that. So from the top panel, there is this plus icon right next to the QuickSight icon there, plus add. Click that and say add title. So it opens up a title screen for you, and you can type in, say, patient revenue info, or whatever title you want to give there. Then this would be a good point before we get into building other visuals. I also, since we were talking about insights and machine learning and all of that, so let's kick off an anomaly detection against this data set, because that will take some time to run. So we will kick that off and then come back to building visuals. So for that, let's create a new tab. Okay, so if you see right under the field wells, you have this tab, and by default, the one that we were working on is called Sheet 1. And there's a plus icon next to it. So go ahead and click that plus icon. It adds a new sheet for you. So now let's rename these sheets, right? So just click on where it says Sheet 1, and it lets you edit that. So I'm going to call it as my summary. And then if I hit enter out of there, that name sticks. And then for sheet 2, I'm going to select that and call it Anomaly. Right? And then enter out of that. And in here, let's delete the visual that's here added by default. So for that, you can just click the visual menu and click delete from that. And we can add a new insight visual. So for that one, click on the plus icon from top panel again, the one right next to QuickSight icon, and select the second option, add insight. So it gives you an option to select a computation. It has added a visual in the background, and then it has given you this pop-up to select the computation. So from there, click the drop down and select anomaly detection and click select. So it says that you have to add a dimension in time, measure, and category. So let's add from the left panel, from the field list, let's single click on admit date, and then the category and revenue. So 3 fields we are selecting: admit date, category, and revenue. So now you can see that the visual changed. It says configure anomaly, and it's giving me an option to get started. So let's click on that get started button. It gives me a configuration screen. Here in the first thing it's saying is it's going to look at admit date, revenue, and category to check for anomalies in the data. And we can choose to analyze all combinations. So what this will get us is it will look at revenue grouped by admit date, revenue grouped by category, revenue grouped by admit date and category. So it will look at all possible combinations to look at the pattern and see if anything stands out. So let's check that box. And then there is an option to schedule it. For now, it's saying the schedule is every day. That's okay. We'll leave schedule. We'll manually run it once. So scroll down to the contribution analysis section and click the select fields option there. And from here, let's select the patient ID. So patient identifier, the payer segment, physician, and the service. Right? So it lets us select up to 4 different fields to see how those dimensions contributed to any anomaly that is detected by QuickSight. So let's make those selections and then click outside of that, and you should see that those fields show up as selected. Now, when you scroll down, you have an option to set the severity. By default, it says medium and above. Click that and change it to low and above. So we are just telling QuickSight what all to surface. Is it only anomalies which are extremely high, or medium above, low and above? So let's say show us everything you find in the data. So that's what we are accomplishing by selecting low and above. And direction is whether it's moving towards the positive direction, negative direction, we'll leave that at all. And then this minimum delta sort of lets you thresholds above which you want to be notified. This sort of lets you suppress noise if you know that you have some variation in your data and you don't want to be bothered by that. So with those changes, let's click the save button in this dialog. And now it should give you an option within the visual to run the anomaly detection. So go ahead and click run now. So it should say analyzing for anomalies. This might take a while. So that's what we wanted to kick off. And with that done, let's click back to our summary tab. And we will continue building some visuals. We'll come back to this anomaly detection piece later on in this webinar. So in here, let's drag and reposition this visual to the left, the time series plot we had got there. I'm just going to resize it a little bit, make it smaller. And, let's also look at the full span. Now, with that rearranged, I'm going to use this visual as the base to create my next visual. So the way to do that is by clicking this visual menu and selecting duplicate visual option. So it gives me since I have multiple sheets, it gives me an option either to duplicate the visual to the same sheet that I'm on or to the anomaly sheet that we created. So I'm going to say duplicate visual to this sheet. So it creates an exact replica of that visual. So now you can see that the selection is on this new visual that we created. The focus is on that. It's the blue line around it, right? So with that focused, let's try changing the visual type. From left panel, bottom section, it's on lightning bolt right now. Let's change it to the second option in the first row. That's the KPI, and see what happens. So when we selected the KPI, now let's see what this is telling us. It's doing a comparison of the sum of revenue for last 2 periods that's available in our data set. So in the top section, it's telling on December 30th, the revenue was 27,553. And on December 23rd, it was 57,000 odd. And what's the difference? It went down by 29K. And this is doing it at the week level, because remember we had set the aggregate earlier on that first visual to week, the aggregate level of date to week. So we can change that. Let's say we want to look at yearly comparison. With this second visual in focus, let's click on the field well and click the drop down again, submit date, and change the aggregate level from week to year. And this visual will now change and it will show me the comparison between 2018 and 2017, because those are the two last years available in our data set. Now, I'll also point out some other configuration you can do with KPI visuals. So for that, let's click this gear icon in the floating visual menu, and that will open up our format visual panel on the left. So in here, the comparison method is left at auto, and that's why it's giving me a difference between the two measures from the two different years. I could show it as a percent. So if I were to select percent, it shows me that current year is, 2018 is 108% of what the value was in 2017. Or if I want to see it as difference as percent, then it shows me 8%. So 8% growth as compared to 2017. Likewise, let's flip back to auto there. So it's showing me the actual variation in the revenue amount. And if I want to swap the primary value, right now it's giving me the difference as the primary value. Say I want to bring the 2018 figure to the center and move this to the side, I can change the primary value displayed from comparison to actual, and it will do that swap for me. So that's two useful options that will come in handy as you start building your dashboards. Now, for both of these, the title that's automatically generated by QuickSight, it says sum of revenue by admit date. But we can, now that we changed the nature of this, we can give it more meaningful title as well. So for that, I can just click on that first visual. I'm just going to click on the title, and it's a freely editable field now. I'm going to call it revenue trend instead. And likewise for the second visual, I'm going to call that revenue year over year. Okay. So one thing to keep in mind is till the point you click on this title and change it, QuickSight will automatically refresh that title as you change the fields you're using in the visual. Say if you, instead of revenue, if you brought in profit, it would have changed to sum of profit by admit date. But if you put in your own hard-coded value there, then that sticks. So any changes you make to the visual, make sure that your custom header is still meaningful, and if needed, edit it. Okay, so I'll pause there a moment to let everyone catch up. Okay, so moving along, let's build some more visuals. So for that, I'm going to click the plus icon up top and say add visual. And into this visual, I'm going to bring in, let's say, the revenue and our hospital group dimension. This was a field that we calculated from within our data prep. So you can see it's still left in autograph mode, and QuickSight has determined that since this is a categorical field, it makes sense to plot this as a bar chart. And let's make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to make this smaller. I want to fit 3 charts into this row, so I'm going to make this smaller by grabbing that bottom right handle. And with that done, I'm going to create duplicates of this visual. So I'm going to choose the option to duplicate to this sheet itself, and do that one more time. So I have got all 3 of my visuals fitting into this bottom line now. And now I'll select my first visual again. Let's see. Yeah, I think the first visual is good. I wanted it to be in this shape. So let's select the second one. And instead of the hospital group, let's deselect that from the field list. So with the center visual, bottom center visual in focus, I'm going to remove hospital group. And instead, I'm going to add hospital. So it's showing me a bar chart with the 3 hospitals that we have data for. And I'm also going to add category. So if I just click on category, it will add category to the group field well. So now you can see that it became, instead of a bar chart, it became a clustered bar chart. That's still because it's in autograph mode. But let's force a chart type on it. Instead of the clustered bar chart, let's make it a horizontal stacked bar chart. So that's in the visual types, second row, third column. That's horizontal stacked bar chart. Let's click that. So now I should see one bar for each hospital with category being plotted as colors within each bar. We'll pause there a moment to make sure everybody is following along. Okay, moving on. I'll select the third chart in the bottom line now. And again, let's remove hospital group from there. So with that chart in focus, I'm going to click on hospital group from field well to deselect it. And then I'm going to add a category here. So it went into a bar chart mode, but let's make it a donut visual instead. So from visual types, let's select donut. That's the fourth visual on the first row. So now we have a donut chart showing the different categories across our data set. And in here, now let's look at some drill down capabilities. So far, we added different kinds of visuals. We added different kinds of dimensions to it. We looked at how we could group and color. Let's look at some drill down capabilities next. So for that, let's do that on the donut chart itself. So make sure that your field well is opened up. If it's not, just click on the field well to open that up. And then with the donut chart selected, from the left-hand field list panel, you can search for subcategory. Just search for sub, and then don't click on it, but click and drag. Okay, click and drag, and don't drop it on top of category, because if you hover on top of category field within your group color field well, you'll see that it says option is replace. If you were to drop it there, your category would get replaced with subcategory. That's not what we are trying to do. Move it slightly below that. So if when it gets to the white space below the category pill, it will change it from replace to add drill down layer. So once you see that option, let your mouse go. And now you will see that category has been added as a layer. I mean, subcategory has been added as a layer under your category. Let's add one more layer before we actually play with this. So from the left panel, clear that search and just search for function. And let's drag function under subcategory as an additional drill down layer. So now in state, you should see three fields in your group color field well: category, subcategory, and function. So with that, let's go back to our chart. And in the donut chart, now you see that there is, if you were to right click on, say, surgical, that segment of the donut, you see an option drill down to subcategory. So if you select drill down to subcategory, so it gives you all the subcategories under surgical. So notice that the total amount changed. Earlier, this was 19 million. Now it's showing you 5 million because this is filtered only for surgical category, and it's showing you the subcategory split from within that. So abdominal is a big component therein, and that, notice that's at 3 million. So let's click that and then drill down to function. So when you do that, it's now going down at that level, and it's really 601. It was rounded to 3 million earlier. So it's showing you the actual filtered down value for abdominal, and then the functions available therein. Likewise, you could right-click and go up by drilling up to subcategory and then to category, or you could use the up arrow in this visual menu to drill up. If you click on the arrow just by itself, it goes up one level. So we are back in that 5 million where we had filtered for surgical. And then if we click up arrow once more, then we are back at the top layer at 19 million with all the categories. What we looked at right now is drilling into one specific component of the donut, and with that filtering, looking at its children. But let's say if we want to look at subcategories across all our categories, we could do that as well, drilling down to the next layer without any filtering. For that, directly click this down arrow from the floating visual menu, and it will take you down. So you can see that the value didn't get filtered. It's still showing you 19 million, but the segments are subcategories. And if you click drill down from subcategory, then it goes down to the function, and then it's again for the full amount, but showing you all the functions available. And from here, if you want to drill up to the top in a single click, then you can click this up arrow with the bar on top from the visual menu, and that will take you back to the top level of the hierarchy. I'll pause there a moment to make sure everybody had a chance to try that out. Okay, so continuing with this, let's now add some more interesting stuff to these visuals. Let's add some filter actions. So using a visual to filter other visuals in the dashboard. So for that, let's click on the hospital group bar chart. So focus that, the first bar chart on the bottom row. And from the left panel, click on Actions. And it gives you an option called Quick Create, and there is a button called Filter Same Sheet Visuals. Go ahead and click on that. You can see that on top it has added an action 1. It says it's a filter action on select. So that's what we want to see. Now, let's also select the center visual, that is sum of revenue by hospital and category. And with that selected, let's repeat the same step. So action panel is still open. You can just click filter same sheet visuals under Quick Create for that visual as well. And you will see an action 1 created for that too. Now, what did this get us, right? So on the first visual, the hospital group bar chart, just click on the bar group A. So you can see that all the other visuals are refreshing just when we clicked on it, right? All the amounts changed, the line chart changed, the forecast changed, the natural language narratives changed up top. And the visual to your right, it's now showing you just 2 hospitals instead of 3. Because remember, when we created this calculation, we had put North Hospital and South Hospital under Group A, and default, which was our downtown hospital, went to Group B. Our default value was Group B. So if I change the selection from Group A to Group B in that first chart, now my second chart is showing just downtown hospital, and all the other charts have refreshed to show me just data for Group B, right? And if I wanted to deselect and get back to the normal state, I can just click on Group B again, and that takes out the visual filtering. I'm back to normal state. Now let's try one more thing. Let's select from the center visual, that is sum of revenue by hospital and category. Let's select the last segment under South Hospital. So it should say South Hospital Surgical. Go ahead and click that. So that's about a 2 million revenue amount there. And you can see that now all the other visuals are filtered, and it's filtered for both South Hospital as well as for that surgical category. And it's showing you, like in this donut, you can see it's only surgical category and it's 2 million. Likewise, if I click on some other segment, it's filtering for both hospital and the category. Because by default, when we allowed it to create filter action using the quick create, it's doing that for all the fields being used in the visual, which in this case, our dimensions are hospital and category, and it has applied filters on both. And we have the option to customize this behavior as well. So with this hospital and category visual selected, if you go to the left actions panel and click against action 1, the drop down, and choose edit, you will see the configuration options. And by default, it's the filter scope is set to all fields. So let's change that to selected fields instead. And let's deselect hospital. Let's say focus only on category and click save in that panel. Now, when you come back to the visual, and if you click on the surgical segment of South Hospital, the behavior is going to be different. Earlier, we had seen that it filtered down to just group A in the first visual because it was filtering on both South Hospital as well as the category of surgical. And on the right-hand side, it had dropped down to 2 million because that was the revenue from South Hospital for surgical. Now we are seeing both group A and group B, and here we are seeing higher revenue amount. That's happening because right now we said don't filter on hospital, just filter on the category value of surgical. So you have all that flexibility to quickly create a filter, but also customize it to best suit your need. Okay, so I'm just going back here and flipping it back to all fields. Likewise, I will also point out that in the bottom section, by default, it's set up to filter all other visuals on your current sheet. You could customize it to select only specific visuals. So if I wanted to impact only this donut chart, and this part you don't necessarily have to do, you could just watch on the screen. So if I were to deselect all of the other components and just leave it at sum of revenue by category, that's the name of my donut visual, and click save. Now, when I come back to this and make a selection, you can see only the donut chart refreshed. All the other charts stayed the same, right? So you have the option to fine tune the scope of your filter actions there that way. I'm going to flip this back to all visuals under target visuals there and click save. I'll give you a moment there. Okay, so let's march on. Here, let's look at reference lines capability. Since we have this nice stacked bar chart, let's look at how we can add a reference line to this. So for that, click on Format Visual, and then, by the way, I have, in case you're not seeing my screen, I am on the Revenue by Hospital and Category visual, and I click the gear icon there to open up Format Visual, and the last option there and called Reference Lines. So I can open that up and choose this option to add new line. Therein, I have an option to add a reference line at a specific constant value, or I could make that a calculated line. So go ahead and select calculated line from the type dropdown. Then it asks you what to base it on. So under column, let's select revenue. And the calculation to apply. So let's leave it at average. So it's plotting this dotted line here. So you can see at around 6.2 million. And then we have the option to change the line format. I could make it a solid line, I could make it a dotted line, and change the colors, so on and so forth. Right? So all that capability is there. Then I could also change the format of the number if I wanted to, and then font size as well. So let's go ahead and click done on this. So we added a reference line here. Right now it's showing a calculation average across all three bars, and it's plotting it at 6.2 million. Now I'm going to click group A from the hospital group bar chart. Let's see what happens. So the data got filtered. This second bar chart now is showing me only South Hospital, North Hospital. And because their revenues are much higher, the average is higher as well. So you can see that this went up from 6.2 million to 8.5 million. Because when I deselect it, it changes. So that's a useful feature in a lot of visualization to have a dynamic calculation, plot a reference line. And where you want fixed thresholds, that's available as well with your constant reference line. And you have the option to add multiple reference lines there as well. So if you wanted to add more to this, you can just go ahead and add more lines there. Okay, so if I wanted to add a constant line at say 1 million, I could do that. Make that a dashed line. Okay, so that's always going to be at 1 million. Okay, so this would be a good time to, since we are talking about filtering, we talked about visual-based filtering, this we can extend it further to the traditional BI filtering methods where we have a control that the user can interact with, and then changing that control filters the data across the dashboard, right? So let's look at how we can set up such a control in QuickSight. So for that, we are going to create filters on hospital group and hospital. Let's close the format visual menu from left. And if you had searched for anything, let's clear the search so that the field list becomes visible. And then you have an option to add a filter right from here. So if you hover your mouse next to hospital group, don't click on hospital group, but hover to the right of hospital group. So you see this menu option appear, and go ahead and click that and select the option to add filter for this field. So you'll see that the left panel is now opened up to the filter options there, and a hospital group filter has been added there. And if you click on that, it opens up the filter interface. It will give you what all are the options available. You can manually pick from there. But what we want to do is add a control, right? So this would let you do a hard-coded filter if you want to. You can configure it right from here. But if you want to allow user to interact with the filter, there are a few more steps involved. So for that, we need to create an internal variable for QuickSight to pass the value from the control that user can interact with to this filter. And that's what we call as parameters. So from left panel, go ahead and click parameters. And it gives you the option to create a new one. You could either click this link, or you could click the plus icon top against parameters. It's the same effect. It would give you a create new parameter dialog box. And in that, let's give it a name. I'm going to prefix my parameter name with a small p. That's purely my preference. It's not a requirement. I'm going to call it P hospital group. And the data type, I'll leave it at string. I'll make this a multiple value parameter. So the values radio button, select multiple values, and then click create. It gives you a new dialog and gives you an option to create a control here. So go ahead and choose that second option. Click on where it says create new control. Click on that control icon. And that will give you an add control dialog. Herein, you can give a name that should appear against that control on the screen. So I'm going to call it just hospital space group. And this style, I want it to be a multi-select dropdown. If I wanted hard code values, like if I know I have only group A and group B, I could very well type that in here just as two separate ones. And you don't need to do this. I'm just showing you. We are going a different route. So I could enter hard-coded values like this, or I could just link it to my data set itself and pull distinct values from there. So make the choice to link to a data set field and select the data set, click patient info data set, and from select a column, select hospital group and click add. So you can see that a new panel opened up here at the top section above your dashboard title. It's called controls, and now you see a hospital group in there. So if you click on that panel, that opens up. And if you click on the drop down, you should see group A and group B. But interacting with it is not going to change anything on the analysis yet, because we just created the control, we associated it with a parameter, but we haven't tied it back to our filter yet. So at this point, let's click on our filter from left panel. So that opens up our filter dialog. And if you're seeing it just as hospital group, then click on it so that the dialog opens up for you. Then you should see this option called filter type with default value filter list in there. Click that, change it to custom filter instead. So now you get an option called use parameters. So I will also point out one thing here before I do that. So look at this top section. That's the scope of the filter where it says only this visual. And if you look at your analysis, you will see that one of the visuals would be focused. So right now, what this means is that the filter we created is acting only on that visual. None of the other visuals are going to get filtered. Okay, so that's the scope of the filter. We can change it manually from here, but let's not do that. Let's go ahead and click use parameters. So a dialog popped up. It's asking whether we want to change the scope of parameter. And why this is happening is because when we are linking in a parameter, QuickSight understands that we are trying to let user interact with this filter using a control. So it makes sense to do that for all the visuals on the dashboard rather than just on one specific one, just to make sure that your users don't get confused, right? So it's asking whether to apply this filter to all the visuals. So if I click yes, the scope will change. So earlier the scope was only this visual. I'm going to click yes here. And now the scope has changed. It now became all visuals, right? And then it gives me an option to select a parameter. So we had created this hospital group parameter. I'm going to select that and hit apply. Now with this step done, let's make a selection. Let's deselect, say, group B and see if all the visuals are changing. Yeah, so visuals are changing. That filtering is working fine. I'm going to flip this back to all groups. We want to create one more filter. So the same process that we followed, we are going to do over for the hospital field. And I will go about it in a slightly different order just to show you that we could do this different way. So I'm going to go create the parameter first this time around. So I can very well create a parameter first. So I click on parameters from left panel. From this parameter screen, I'm going to click the plus icon from the top against parameters. And then I'm going to call this P hospital. I'll leave it as a string. I'll make it to be multiple values and then click create. And there I can choose the option to create a control. I'm going to give it a display name as hospital, and then it can be multi-select drop-down. Again, link to a dataset field. I'm going to link to patient info dataset and to my hospital field therein, and click add. So this time we created the parameter, we created the control, but we are yet to create a filter. So let's click on filter from left panel. Just like we did for parameter, instead of going from the field list, we could start from here as well. So I could just click this plus icon against filters, and it opens up this box for me. And I can select hospital from there, and it adds this filter for hospital. Now the rest of the steps, I'm going to do the same. So I'm going to click on hospital. I'm going to say the filter type should be custom filter, use parameters, accept the change scope suggestion. So it applies to all visuals. And I'm going to select my hospital parameter there and hit apply. With that done, I want to make sure my filtering is working. So I'm going to deselect downtown hospital from my control and make sure that my visuals are updating fine. They are. So I change it back to all selection. And I will give you a moment to complete till this step. Okay. So moving on, there is one more thing that's important with respect to filter controls. Because when you have different dimensions being filtered on, you could end up in a situation where a user selects a mutually exclusive filter criteria. So for example, I could go in here and deselect group A. So that means I'm selecting only my group B, which has only downtown hospital in there. But coming to the second hospital filter, I might just deselect downtown hospital. So I don't get any data on my screen at all. It's a mutually exclusive filter. So as an author, if you want to avoid that kind of situation for your end users, you could have these filters talk to each other and display only relevant values. So let's enable all values in both, and then I'll show you how to do that. So on the hospital control, on the top of it, at the same level as your control name, you have this control menu option, the three dots. Just click that and select the edit option. And then at the bottom of it, you see this option called show relevant values only. So click that button. And then it gives you an option as to what other controls you want this control to work with. So right now, since we have only two, only hospital group shows up there, I'm going to select that and click update and then apply on the original screen. So now what's going to happen is initially hospital has all three values. But now if I go into my hospital group and say deselect group B, in addition to the visuals changing, my control has also refreshed. So if I look at my hospital control now, I do not see downtown hospital as an option. So I cannot end up in a mutually exclusive filter. This I have done as a one-side cascade. So the filtering the group is cascading onto the hospital and showing the relevant values there. But a user might very well start at the hospital and then go back to the group. So I could do the reverse as well to make sure they don't end up in the mutually exclusive filter scenario going from hospital to hospital group. So I can repeat the same process. Against hospital group, I could select edit, show relevant values, select hospital in there, update and apply. And now it cascades both ways. So if I were to look at hospital group, it's showing me A and B. But if I come into hospital and then say deselect downtown hospital, you can see that the hospital group control also refreshed, and it's no longer showing me group B because I deselected downtown hospital. So that's adding filters through controls, and then how to make that controls talk back and forth to make sure your users have a good experience. Now, at this stage, we are working on making this a much easier process. Right now, to add a control, we went through creating a filter, creating a parameter, creating a control, linking everything together. So there is a feature which is right now in preview, which makes that much more easier. So you can just watch this part. This will not work on the accounts that you are using yet. Mine is enabled for preview. So if I were to go into the earlier customer churn model that I had there and create an analysis from it, let's see, I could bring in churn as a dimension and maybe plot the account length against it. And now if I want to quickly filter on churn and expose that as a control, I can use this dialog against the churn field from the field list to add that as a filter. So filter got added for churn. And now to bring it in as a control, I can click on the menu option against that filter and say add to sheet. And that directly puts a control here for me with the valid values, true and false, which were the values available for churn. And if I deselected false, it shows me only true here. So we are making that process easier. Both options will still be available. The parameter-based filtering is needed for a lot of other scenarios. So whatever we covered right before I showed this, that's still going to stay. And this easier option is also going to come to enable you to build controls faster. So with that, I'm coming back to the analysis that we were building. And I think this would be a good point to go check what happened with our anomaly. We had run that anomaly earlier. So let's go into the anomaly detection sheet and just try refreshing that. So that has run and it has come back with one anomaly. It's found that on December 16 for labor and delivery category, the revenue was 20,000 and it was higher than the expected value. So based on the time trend for that category, the expected value was around 6,000, but that day the revenue was higher and it's being called out as an anomaly here. So we have this option at the bottom, explore anomalies. We can get deeper into that by clicking this. So if I click explore anomalies there, this exploration panel opens up and it's showing me the trend for labor and delivery, and then it's saying it was this 20K is what it is tracking as an anomaly there. And then contributors. So I could change the contribution selectors here. And let's say initially it was set up to analyze for these 4 fields. If I wanted to select something else, I can. I'll have to deselect these and then say select the hospital group. There is a start and end date specified in there. And if I click analyze, it will run it against that. And right now it's not finding anything in particular for that date range. But if there were a contribution that's worth calling out for hospital group, then that would show up in this section. So with that, let's click back on this back to analysis screen. And then go back to our summary sheet.